Hi, everybody. It's Diana Van Blaricombe, and I am your Vice President of ERP Strategy here at ROI Healthcare Solutions. So today, joining me once again is Ben Hoagland, who's with our supply chain team. Hi, Ben.
Hi.
Hey, welcome back. We previously touched on some of the great features within Cloud Suite, and we're talking about item lifecycle management. And today we're going to talk about how we can improve the process for requesting new items, right? And really focusing on the monitoring and the managing of getting new items and new data approved, really to support the buying and contract decisions. The other cool thing is there's a lot of delivered workflow now, right, for routing and approvals. So let's get started and talk a little bit about, part two of item lifecycle management is really about this item lifecycle ad or item ad. Share with us a little bit of why this feature is so cool.
Sure. Well, first, let me start off by saying if there's any of you that haven't seen the first part of item lifecycle management, it's on the ROI webpage, and that covers the recalls and product conversions. Today, as Diana mentioned, we're going to cover the second part, which relates to new item ads or what are called new item proposals. So with that, I will start to share my screen and we can dive into this feature. Okay. So to start off, the new proposals or new item ads are mainly going to come from probably the requester role. Now, if we take a look at the requester role, what you're going to notice is that there's really two ways for a requester to propose a new item or to request a new item. There's a difference between the two, which I'm going to explain. There's request new item, which if I click this, it will bring up a request screen and they can add some information. And that's really looking for an IPA to take that information to, through a custom IPA flow, route it for approvals, and really do whatever you want to do. And then the second method is what we're going to discuss today. This assumes that you're using item lifecycle management and you're going to be using the new item proposal feature. So if I click propose a new item, that gets the process started. Now, before we go through this process, I did want to mention kind of the benefits of it. I've worked in a hospital supply chain, and if you talk to the end users, one of the common complaints might be, about supply chain. How are they doing? One of the common complaints might be, well, it takes too long to get an item ad added to the item master, added to user templates and so forth. So what this process does is it gives you a very flexible flow that new requests for items can come in. They can go through, let's say, a value analysis team for approval. You can route it to any number of additional people for approval. And then finally, with that item, you can choose to add it to a contract and then finally add it to the item master. So this brings a lot of transparency into a process that, looking at my clients in the past, is usually outside of the system. So it's bringing a lot of transparency into those, or bringing in those processes that have historically been outside of the system into the system, where you can get a lot of transparency, get service level agreement metrics, and then have auditability and traceability of each one of those requests. So
And I think that's a really good point too, because when we do a lot of work around these implementations or optimization, we see a significant amount of off-contract spend. We see different pockets around the organization that are kind of have this autonomy with spending, and ultimately what happens is we see the spend kind of getting out of control. And as you know, with things the way they are today, people are trying to control costs, but in a respectful way, right? So I think this is a great way to not only give some autonomy, but then have that controlled process, right?
Right. And that's also a difference between request new item and propose new item. So request new item, now you could use something like configuration console to change the default form that pops up, but it really is just what is the item information. However, on propose a new item, as you'll see, you have to answer questions, or let me say you can answer questions that the value analysis team is going to want to see, like what's the expected usage? Is there an item you're replacing? that sort of thing. So analysis can be done. And like you mentioned, what is the impact of the organization if we bring in this new item? Is it new technology that's going to cost a whole lot more, or is it a new item that's going to save the organization money? And so it's really geared around the process that hospital organizations are familiar with, where they have a value analysis team looking at new items coming in and determining if they want a trial for the item, or what is the impact of the organization in order to make their decision on approval or not. With that being said, I'll start a new item proposal and we can see some of those features.
Great. Now, this is just another portion of the features and functions that are available within Cloud Suite, right? So for the folks that maybe have already moved to Cloud Suite or are thinking about moving to Cloud Suite, this would be a terrific module to implement as part of your scope to really, ramp up this process. We talk about using the tools, right, to transform the way we do business. And it really is a tool. So if we think about what tools can we give people to make their jobs easier, make approvals easier, make things faster. But I think the important thing here that you mentioned, Ben, is the visibility into the value analysis pieces, the components. What's the spend? What's the effect on the organization? Is it really something we want to swap out or replace? Or is it in addition to what we already have? And that's huge for organizations.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And we'll see that right on the next, I believe it's the next screen. So I'm just going to put some fake information in here. We're going to add something that is related to Abbott. So I'm just going to duplicate this description. Now I do have some staged here that's got more realistic information, but I do want to show some of the information that you'll need to add to your proposal.
Now, Ben, for the folks that are in the hospitals and in these organizations moving around, is this something that I can get to from, for example, Infor and I could do it from my mobile device from anywhere?
It is. If you were in the requester role, you can get to it from Infor.
Awesome.
Yeah. Now, you do have the ability to add attachments too. So this is important because sometimes a person that needs to add an item needs to add many items. And so oftentimes they might give you a catalog. Now I would say that this feature isn't geared towards that kind of workflow, but it can be done. And we'll talk a little bit about that later after we get through kind of an initial item add.
Okay.
So I added my header level information on the proposal. Now we'll propose an item. And I'm just going to add this item again.
And so here we're just adding more details behind the item and what it is that's being requested, right?
But this, again, is geared towards value analysis. You can see right here, product justification or return on investment, ROI. And this is something that organizations that have value analysis teams, it's very common in their item add forms to have something like this. So I'll put in item cost is lower than the current,
So we're really looking for the details behind why we want to add this item. It could be cost, it could be better quality, it could be a number of things, but being able to enter that justification is key for that group to do the approval.
And again, so they're going to have the cost here. And then we can say what the unit of measure is. It's just for buying. Manufacturer number. I'm not going to put a G10 in yet. But also product service line. So this is important because when we show the item add process and what this is capable of, it's very flexible. So the item lifecycle coordinator is going to take a hold of this new item proposal, and they can determine who needs to approve it. So this product service line, if you say something like cath lab, maybe that's a different item approver than somebody that's going to be a normal med surg item. So that's important. And then you can say, monthly usage, it's just 200 here. And then if it's on a current contract or not, maybe this is just an item that's not yet in the item master that you have a current contract for. And that's important. This example, we're not going to put in something here, but It's there if you need it. And then also items to be replaced. Now, this is something where, as I mentioned earlier, what is the impact of the organization? And up here I said the item cost is lower than the preferred, current preferred item. What is that item? And we can put an item number in here. I actually have an example that we're going to cut over after this is added that's very similar to this that has an item add. And what's nice about that is you can do what's called a product transaction query, and you can see all the different locations that are using this item. You can see what the spend is. So that is a very manual process normally during an item add. You have to say, well, what is the spend on our current item? Who's using it? Do we need to ask those areas if they need a trial of this new proposed item? And that can all be automated with this software.
That's great. And any of these fields can be marked as required with Configuration Console, right? So we can kind of force the process of gathering the information that's needed for the value analysis.
Yep. And I'm not going to put in something right now, but I do have an example that's staged already for us. Just because I forgot the item. But we'll click Finish here. And then it kind of wants you to look back through it again. If I need to add another item, I can. Again, add an attachment if we added a full catalog.
Okay.
And then I'm going to submit.
And so when we submit, does that actually get routed through an IPA or in-for process automation, or is that just a transaction that goes through the system to the next role?
That's exactly what it does. So it doesn't involve an IPA.
There's no workflow yet.
No, it just goes straight to the item lifecycle coordinator. Okay. And then you can see right here, new item proposals. If I look back at what we just did, this item proposal is 89. So if I go to new item proposals, go to the end here, you can see 89. This is the one I had staged earlier, which we'll cut over to. But yeah, so it just goes straight to the item lifecycle coordinator, just kind of like a recall notice would be. And before I get into taking control of the item lifecycle coordinator, I did want to mention that during the setup in item lifecycle management, you've got the ability to set up responders and coordinators, which we covered in our first part of item lifecycle management. But also we've got new item proposal and reviewers. So you can see I am set up as a new item proposal. So when we use that feature, when we route these new item proposals for review, those individuals will need to be set up as a reviewer.
Okay.
So I just wanted to mention that.
But that does give us the control, and it gets the information to the right people soon, right? Very quickly, so that they have the opportunity to work through the process.
Yep.
It's great.
And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 88 here. This is very similar to the one that we just added. And we can see on this one that there is an item right now that's currently being used. This is one area that's not very explicit, but if I put in the current item, this is where you find that. So you can find a current item, go out of this, and at the top, I can click Product Transaction Query. So I'm going to choose and look at all of those things, submit it.
Like how easy it is to get to the information, and really, when you think about the data that you need to make these decisions with Cloud Suite, it's all here. It's all under the hood, as we used to like to say.
Yeah, this is also, as we discussed in our first webinar on item lifecycle management, this product transaction query really automates finding all the usage in an organization for these types of things. And it's very, very handy. It's probably one of my favorite features of item lifecycle management. This is being used in so many different ways.
Yeah. Used for this process, obviously, but really important in the recall process.
Oh, yep. So what an item lifecycle coordinator would do when they get this is review all the information and make sure it's accurate. So looking through this, I can say, well, the coordinator, I'm going to assume control of it. It didn't default to me because there's other coordinators here. So I'm going to assign myself. And then task instructions, we're going to do new item master add. It's going to be our default. You can also put in a manufacturer here. I know this was Argon, I think it was, but I can make it anything. Let me just put in Abbott. That looks good. I'm going to take a look at these items here. So the product transaction query is done now. There was only two tabs here before. This is, again, the information that the requester put in for me that I'm reviewing. Expected monthly usage, unit cost, the unit of measure that they have here. And then this tab showed up. So, and that's because that the current item has been used on a couple different requisitions. And now if this item was in inventory, if it had a more extensive use, it was on contracts, it was on templates, those will also show up here, so I can see that.
Like a one-stop shop for information. That's great.
Yeah. And then this is going to help me decide who needs to be reviewers on this. So nobody's a reviewer right now, and I'm going to add a reviewer.
Okay.
But it also added task. Now I'm going to remove these for this demonstration purposes. But the reason it added task is because this requisition line is associated with this individual, Seth here. So Seth automatically got tagged for a task, and it was the default task I added in the very beginning, which was item master add. But I'm going to remove that because I'm going to go through the approval process.
So here again, we're seeing the integration with contract management, the item master, all the other pieces of Cloud Suite that enable good supply chain management.
All right, so I'm going to make myself the reviewer.
Okay.
Or the, yep. All right, so it's high priority, the due date, day, item master add. Okay, now once that's added, I'm going to cut over to a different role. So I'm going to play the part of the value analysis team.
Okay.
I'm going to go to cycle reviewer, responder,
So let's talk about the roles for a minute. So, within Cloud Suite, these various different security roles, these process owners, are delivered in the system.
Mhm.
And it gives you the ability to quickly deploy those roles and responsibilities, right, within an organization. Do you find that sometimes in an organization, maybe some of the smaller community hospitals, we have people who may be assigned multiple roles, not necessarily in this process, but, other processes as well. They could be holding two roles, wearing two hats, but then still having some checks and balances within the organization for, these approval processes and things.
Yeah, and especially the materials managers. I would say you see that a lot, where the materials manager could be an approver, but they also have tasks related to other parts of item lifecycle managers. So they wear multiple hats in the system. That's very normal. Yeah.
And again, easy to deploy through those delivered security roles.
Yeah, and as we
Yeah.
talked about in the first part, one of the benefits of item lifecycle management is really for sometimes for the larger hospitals, because if multiple cath labs, let's say across an organization, need to have trials, we'll show you a feature in this where they can say, I'm going to approve, but I want this to go through trial. But in a larger organization, maybe all the cath labs want to do a trial.
Mhm.
So each one of those could be a new item proposal. They could respond to this and approve it, which is really nice because coordinating that and having documentation is very
Oh,
important.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Just trying to coordinate something like that without having a tool would be difficult.
Yes. Um, okay. So I'm going into the new item proposal, and here's the new item. I can take a look at it, the justification. Um, you can see the information that was added from the end user. Well, this requisition line summary is not showing up because it's not related to this location or to me.
Right?
Any attachments that we have, questions. So is a price file included? No. Is the item on an executed contract? No. Answer those. And if I would, again, like we discussed in part one, if I need to talk back and forth with the item lifecycle coordinator, I can. And then I've got some options up here. I can reject the new item proposal. Maybe it's not relevant for me. Or maybe I don't, want this item to come in. I can ask the coordinator a question. And then these are the ones that will show both of these workflows. So approve new item proposal just means, yep, it's a pretty standard item. Maybe the item is on an existing contract and we've already kind of approved it to be in our system. It just was never added to the item master. So that's what we're going to show at first. The other one is approve new item pending trial. So this is that case I mentioned with the cath lab where it's a new item, it's new technology, and they want to do some trials on it first. So this is pretty slick.
And does that allow us to define the trial period?
It does, yep.
Nice.
And it actually brings in the requisition automatically from the item lifecycle coordinator's role as well. And so in my past, when we had to do that, I'd have to hand that off to what was called a strategic sourcing specialist. Other organizations, they may call them buyers. And then they would have to create some requisitions for those trial items, make sure everybody got them and so forth, where all of that can be managed centrally from the item lifecycle coordinator role. So
We can take that historically cumbersome process and really get some automation behind it and make it move much faster.
yep. It doesn't like the fact that I didn't give text here on why it's not on an executed contract.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add something here that's not how you should do it in real life. But now let me add it. Okay, so it says it's completed. Let's just verify that. So if I go to the item lifecycle coordinator role again, just refresh, status change to approve. So now, if I can do a couple things. I could send this to another reviewer if I wanted to, if I didn't send it to them initially. I can also add task. So maybe this item needed to come through, it's going to be distributed through our main distributor, let's say Medline or Owens & Minor or Cardinal. And so not only do we need to add it to the item master, but we need to start the process of figuring out what our demand estimate's going to be, talking with Medline or another distributor and saying we need to have this brought into distribution. Here's our demand estimates and so forth. So that could be a task right here that we kick off and say, Diana, you're in charge of bringing this in through distribution, and then that can also be managed here.
Beautiful.
And so ultimately, after everybody's approved, the item lifecycle coordinator is in charge of doing the final approval. Anyway, so I'm going to approve. And then we've got a couple options here. So if this item isn't on a contract, I can create a proposed contract right now. Now, this is linking item lifecycle management to contract management. Because if we flip back to the requester role, we can propose a new contract. That's down here, propose a contract. So it's the same process. So the requester doesn't have to do both of them. They just submit a new item, give us the information for and then I can propose a new contract right here. And that's going to go over to the contract management team, and then they can approve or reject the new contract. It's going to add it to the contract as a special right now. But after I add it to the item master, then it'll update the contract with the actual
Mhm.
new item number. So we can take a
Perfect.
look at that. And check if processing is complete for new item proposal. Do not check if further processing will be performed. So we are going to perform more processing, that being adding the item to the system and so forth. So I'm just going to leave that unchecked now.
Yeah, I think the visibility into where things are in the process and just really this whole, it's not just the cost associated with it that we're controlling. It's really the process. And if we can automate the process and really streamline the process so that we are shortening the process, right? It takes less time, and time is money. And so we don't have people chasing things down. We don't have people doing things manually. We know exactly where things are at any given time. And just being more efficient is going to give organizations back some huge value.
Yeah, and one thing I like about this process is how flexible it is. You saw right here from an Lifecycle coordinator perspective, I can add new reviewers.
Mhm.
I can add tasks to this to make sure things are done from an end-to-end perspective. Where if you build an IPA, now IPAs can be customized to do all sorts of things. However, like you said, time is money, and development effort is not cheap. And then you've got to go through testing. And once you have that flow built, um, sometimes, let me say, I don't want to say all the time, but sometimes it's not as flexible because it's going through a predefined route. So if I just want to add one or two more approvers, well, that may not be in the flow right there. So you either got to modify the flow to make it a little bit more generic and have the ability to do that, or it really can't be done during that
Yeah.
process.
Well, so this is giving us the flexibility to deal with some exceptions in the process very easily and with visibility and transparency as to where it is.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
great.
Okay. Now that the majority of the ad is built, let's notify somebody that speaking about transparency, let's notify the requester that this item is approved. Now, since I hold all of the roles, this gets a little weird, but I'm going to add myself.
You have all the power.
Yeah. So I added a notification. I was the original requester. And let me now release the transaction. Okay, so it has been released. Now, the requester here, you can see the new item proposals. Now, my new item proposals, let's see what they see. Now, they're going to get a notification too. But this was 88, and you can see that the new item ad type, proposal date, it now has been approved. So again, going back to the transparency, there's an easy way for them to see this. If you have to build an IPA, this might need to be customized. You might need to build a custom screen that shows statuses and so forth. This is all baked right in.
It's awesome. Yeah, and workflows are great. The IPAs are great, but they do require a somewhat well-defined process. And we know that sometimes in the real world, it isn't always well-defined. Sometimes we have exceptions, and sometimes we need to do things just a little bit differently based on the scenario. So not having it tied to an IPA in this case, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, and I'm one that loves IPA, so I'm definitely not knocking that tool, but it's nice to have this kind of all baked into the system.
Mhm. Well,
Now,
and I think here it's more process driven, right? The system was built to be looking at this process overall and making the process easy as opposed to, you know, a rigid process where we know some flexibility is required here.
Yeah, and then, I think that a lot more people will be able to use this straight out of the box and get
Mhm.
benefit from it, where development's not required.
That's
Now,
great.
we added the item, we approved the item, but what happened from there? So let's take a look at that. I'm going to go into the item master specialist role here, and let's take a look at. I've been testing recalls. The item,
Our other favorite part of this application.
yes. Okay, so once I'm in the item master specialist role, we can take a look at the maintain item worksheet. And once we're in here, the maintain item worksheet, for those that aren't familiar with it, is really a cue to work for the item master specialist. These are things that they need to add to the item master. Now, there's a couple ways entries come into this. One is through the process that we just did, and another one is if you want to take a look at specials on a contract that are getting usage. You can run a report and you can say, oh, this special in this contract has been used 3 times. Let's add it to the item master. And that's also another thing that builds up into this queue. So when we're taking a look at this, let's go to the end here. And we can see new item proposal 88. So this is our needle that we were adding. And then I have the ability to go in here as the item master specialist and edit any of this information. So we know oftentimes that users, they try their best. Maybe the information they provide us isn't perfect. They provided, let's say, 1 unit of measure here.
Mhm.
And that was the stock unit of measure of each. Or maybe we need to add alternate units of measure, box, case, and the associated conversion factors. We can do that here. We can add vendor items. So let's do that real quick. Okay, so let's add some additional information. Issue account, let's just do.
And again, what you're doing here is we're really having that item master specialist being able to keep the integrity of the item master, which, we've talked about previously, which is so important.
And in this role, what is also great is, I've added a couple things to the item master record. Now, vendor items. So this is going to be, this is another form in the system that we can do right here. Everything's kind of connected. You see the vendor items here. That's great. Unit of measure. Let's add, let's say, a box of 10. It's going to be inventory transactions. Let's say it's valid. Let's say it's valid for buying. Let's actually say it's the default for buying. And then we can add it to any locations that it needs to be added to. So if it needs to be added to a perpetual location in your organization, you can do that right here. You can add G10s. You can add NDC codes if it's for drugs and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save. Okay. So I've added the information I think I need to add. Okay, one group, submit this. Results can be reviewed in the results tab. So let's take a look at it here.
And so, one of the things that you're doing here, Ben, is you mentioned that we could be specific to which location we're adding these items. So we can really, again, control the spend, control the process if it's an item that is specific only to certain areas, procedures, locations, a clinic versus a hospital, whatever. We can be very specific about how we deploy these supplies as well, all right from the system.
Yeah, and in version 10, these are different forms, right? So adding it to the IC11 or the item master, and you'd have to add it to PO13, which is the vendor item, IC12 for the different item locations. You can even add it to the PAR locations. So, you can do everything within that one item worksheet, where historically that would be going to different forms, making sure everything was added beforehand. And so it's very convenient.
Yeah.
And as we saw, this is our item ad right here. It refreshed, came in. And here's our item number that was added. So, and then it tells you what the vendor item is. And that contract that we talked about earlier,
Mhm.
it updated, contract line 106. And then this would have shown as a special because we added it before the entire item master ad was done. Now, because it was assigned an item number, it updated the contract with the true item number. So we just, you can do the full spectrum of an item ad within just the item worksheet in the process we showed here, adding it to the item master, vendor items, item locations, and contracts all in kind of one fell swoop. So
That's awesome. I just want to take a minute to talk about the downstream process from here. A couple other folks on our team, we've been talking about revenue cycle. And as we're working with several of our clients, we're talking about implementing Infor Cloud Suite finance and supply management, and then introducing, if they're not already using it, Clinical Bridge. And really, it's about making sure that the patient billing is correct. And so, we're going to have some other materials on our website coming soon. Always check back because there's always a lot of new content. But we've been having some great conversations with supply chain and finance leaders in organizations about how we keep this process intact. And I think what you're showing here is a huge piece of that because it is really dependent upon keeping that item master up to date. And then Clinical Bridge can pick that up, pass that over to the Epics and Cerners of the world, update the charge master, which then updates the Epic or Cerner side of it so that when we're actually using these items, that the patient billing comes out the other end correctly, right? And by using Clinical Bridge, we can automate that such that pricing and those items and the fees for those things are being done more frequently. So in a lot of organizations, we see that process can be quite cumbersome. So they only do it infrequently. Sometimes it's annually, sometimes it's quarterly. With Clinical Bridge, we can do it every day. So we can keep that charge master and that patient billing, very, very accurate. And when you think about what's happening with supply chain and the cost of things and all of that, don't leave any revenue on the table. Let's make sure that our billing is accurate and current, which is a huge thing in these organizations today.
yeah, and especially since you can add it to the contract, because I know Clinical Bridge has hooks into contract management for spend and cost information as well. So it's
It's perfect.
now. So I mentioned that there's really two types of item master ads. One is kind of the normal ad that I showed here, but there are times, especially in the physician preference areas, where they might want to test an item. So let's go over and kind of go through the same process. It's going to be a little different because we're actually going to have the system manage the trial aspect of this process. So again, I'm an item lifecycle coordinator. And if I go to new item proposals, we just added 89 today. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go through the process of 89. I'm going to show you the first half. And then we're going to cut over to 86. And the reason being is something that you mentioned earlier, Diana, which is, is there a trial end date? And there actually is. So when we start going through this and I pick the trial end date, well, I can't pick today now. And so I've got to cut
That
over.
would be a trial.
Yeah, we've got to cut over the one that was staged earlier. So that's the reason we're going to be doing that. But, the user, everybody that's viewing this webinar will be able to see in just a moment why we have to do this.
Awesome.
So new item proposal type. Let's do new item ad. Coordinators can be myself. Task instructions. Let's just default it to item ad. Save now. Add a manufacturer code. It's good.
I think there's so much functionality here. And really, I think for us, being able to help organizations determine, how they're going to take advantage of some of these leading practices. But we really want to leverage the software to do that. So it's easy for organizations to kind of change what they're doing today leverage a best practice, use the system to do that. So it makes the change management a little bit easier too, because the system is enabling all of it.
Yes. And one thing that we're not going to do on this time is we're not going to do a product transaction query. And in fact, you don't see a product transaction query option here. And the reason why is because when we set this up together earlier in the presentation, I didn't put a replacement item. So there's nothing to do a product transaction query on. And because of that, we don't have a replacement item that's been used. You can see that no task have been assigned already. So I deleted those in the last step, but those aren't going to be here for us. But we are going to assign it to a reviewer. Do myself again.
Yeah, and again, while you're doing that, Ben, I just want to talk about if you're already on Cloud Suite and you have not implemented item lifecycle management, that certainly would be a great add to the Infor portfolio that you have. If you're in the middle of implementation and you're going to be implementing it, I think there's some great information for you to take away from our sessions here and the previous session that you'll find on our website. But I do think it's something for organizations to consider. It's just brings such a robust process when we, again, I'm going to go back to time is money, and we're seeing a lot of the hospitals struggling with the great, what are we calling it, the great resignation. Everybody's changing jobs and we can't find people, and we're trying to do more with fewer people. Being able to do this process within Cloud Suite with everything here in one place, a lot of the automation that happens, again, is going to save time for folks and make it a more streamlined process. So it'll help us deal with some of those issues in these organizations by just being more efficient.
Yeah, and I think that efficiency extends to the end users because, we mentioned earlier, some of the major gripes with supply chain are the item app process. So
Right.
it brings that transparency. It lets the users know that you're working with it, the status, and that doesn't all have to be developed custom. And so, those smaller organizations that may have, not a lot of bandwidth with their IT department, they can just start using this and building that relationship with the end users, and trust too as well, because with transparency, usually, I guess people are more trusting that the process is actually occurring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, in an organization that's moving to the cloud, one of the things to look at is that mobile access through Infor Go. So for the folks that are, at the front end of this process, they could actually do that proposal or do that request right from Infor Go, from the app, right off their phone, right off their iPad, and really get that process started right away while they're in the moment of it. So they don't have to remember to go back and do it.
Yeah. So what I did is I just added myself as the reviewer. So I'm going to switch roles. And so let me change over to the master responder or the item lifecycle management responder. Look at the item proposals. Whoops, open once. And here it is. So this time, instead of saying that I'm going to approve the new item proposal, let me answer some questions here. No questions? Well, here they are. No.
I love the ease of this.
Yeah, it does really make it nice. And so I'm just going to say approve new item in trial. Okay. So I've kind of quasi approved this one, and we'll see that when I go back to the item lifecycle coordinator here. So it says approved pending trial. So I'm going to take that advice here, and I'm going to approve pending trial. Because what might happen here is, let's say this went out to 12 organizations, and all 12 of them said approve, 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 and one person said approve pending trial.
Mhm.
So we might have to have a discussion amongst the team and say, is a trial really needed? And ultimately, as the coordinator, I can say, just approve it. But in this case, I'm going to approve it in the trial. And then it asks if I want to create an item before creating the requisition for the trial items. I'm not going to. I'm just going to bring it in as a special.
Okay.
This is a very
That's another
common,
key piece about Cloud Suite too, is the specials are easier to handle.
yeah. And that's pretty common with trial items. A lot of times you don't create an item master item until you know it's approved.
Right. Keep that item master clean.
Yeah. Now we are ready to create the trial requisitions. So we've got our item here. Let's just say that we're going to bring in 2 for our trial. Here's our unit of measure that we're using. And then we need to decide what locations we're going to use this for. So I'm going to create a location.
And again, giving us the ability to control which locations are part of the trial.
Yeah. And this requester here, so the item lifecycle coordinator should also be a requester, or this can be for somebody else. I'm going to use myself again.
An army of one.
Yep. All right. And then once it's created, I need to select this company location to be a part of the trial. So I'm going to select that. Once that happens, you can see this button appears at the top. Create requisitions from item proposal trial. Oh, just noticed something.
Yeah, save it.
This requesting location that we created didn't default a distribution account. This is just test data. I didn't pick a requesting location that did it. What we're going to do is we're just going to add this information quickly because it's possible that you want to use a different location or a different call center for this trial. This is how you would do it.
Awesome.
I'm going to like that. Okay. Now I choose the requested delivery date. And I've got the option here of no charge items or release requisitions, or both. And I'm going to choose both. So the vendor is going to give it to us for free, and we're going to release the requisition. Okay. So the action was completed. So all trial requisitions have been created. That's what we're going to choose now. So I'm done with this process. I'm going to let the system know that. And then I'm going to choose the trial end date. So the approvals can't be done before this end date has been reached. And then, so this is when the trial end date happens. And so when are reviews done by? Number of days after. Let's give them 5 days to get their reviews in. Okay. And now it's going to sit there on that status, approved pending trial, until those reviews are done. So this is the part where I'm going to switch over to a different notice, and one that is already kind of in process. Item proposals, let's say reviews in process.
So not only do we control the beginning and the end date, we can also control when we want the feedback by as well, so that we make sure we get that feedback in a timely manner and we can move through the process of approving.
Yes. So we're going to cut over to the other one we had staged. And we can see that this one shows it's approved. Okay, so now that it's approved pending trial, what's going to happen is that the individual that said that they're going to approve it pending trial, you go back to the responder, you can see that they can't approve it yet. But once that trial date is reached, then a button's going to be up here to do the same exact thing. It's going to say, approve or reject. And so they have the option of approving it. Once they approve it, then the item lifecycle coordinator, again, can approve the entire requisition or an entire proposal and go through the process that we just went through, where they can add it to a contract, they can hit the item worksheet again, and then the item master specialist can add it to the item master, procurement templates, item locations, anything else they want to add it to.
It's beautiful. It's a great process. And I think having these controls in place too, we don't have to try to remember when the trial period ends, and just collecting feedback. All of those things are really here in front of us to be able to manage that process a little bit better.
Mhm. And even as the item lifecycle coordinator, you can see that I can't update anything here. I can't just say, well, I want to approve it myself. But I do have a couple options. I can update the trial end date, so I can move it up or down based upon my needs. And then I can cancel the trial. So if for some reason we're canceling the trial, we can do that, and then I can ultimately close out this notice. But those are the options I have until the trial end date is up.
Great.
So this process really streamlines the entire item add process, has a lot of flexibility, again, because I can add multiple reviewers, I can add tasks that need to be done afterwards that are related, and then I can include notifications for those individuals that need to be notified of it. So in the last example, I just notified the requester, but I can also notify, domains. So maybe all cath labs need to be aware that this new item add is there. That's also something you can do. Or you can include individuals through the notifications tab here.
That's great.
Yeah, really streamlines it. And this with item, you get all of this with item lifecycle management. And I think it's a feature that more people need to take advantage of, and hopefully
Absolutely.
this demonstration helps.
So I'm going to put you on the hot spot here for a second, Ben, and not that anybody watching this will hold us to it, but what, for an organization that maybe is already on Cloud Suite or implementing Cloud Suite, and they don't have item lifecycle management in their scope, or maybe they're thinking about, well, we've already gone live on FSM. This would be a great add for our team. What do you see as kind of the average of how long this should take to get set up and deployed?
I would say that there's a change management component with this product, both on the recall side and on the item add side. So I'm going to include that in my time frame. But I would say, 3 months, 4 months. That includes the change management aspect. Would be probably sufficient.
Okay.
If it's a bigger organization with a lot of different moving parts, maybe a little longer, but I think that would be.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a good point. A lot of the things that are being deployed through Cloud Suite, the actual system setup is the easy part. It's getting the broader organization to understand the change, how it impacts them, and then trained on the new process, right? So that change management portion of the implementation, so that they can start leveraging this functionality and doing it properly and doing it well, right? All right,
Yeah.
awesome. So for those folks who missed part one, you're going to want to go back and watch that on the recalls. I think for anybody that is really looking at controlling and keeping their item master clean, and really the cost factor, the trials, all of that, this is a great add for them. Again, enabled through Infor Go, so we get a little bit of mobility with being able to do some of these processes. And I think it's a great thing for an organization to explore if they're looking for other ways to, all our favorite words, right? Streamline, automate, and ultimately gain more efficiencies and do some cost controls.
Yeah. And one last thing is the number one question I receive is, how do you do it when somebody, and we alluded to this earlier, how do we do it when somebody just gives me a catalog full of items? So, what they can do is through the attachments, they could add the catalog. Now, the notice itself, this notice or this new item proposal, really will be related to all of it. So with trial items, you have the option of adding one or more trial items. You would have to manually add those for the locations.
Mhm.
With the contract aspect, you would probably need to send that worksheet over to the contract management folks and let them know. But it can be done. It can be managed because it's a process. The process remains the same, but sometimes the things like the product transaction query won't be as helpful. But you can still get visibility and transparency into where that request is or that proposal is. So that's my answer for that. I think that hopefully there's some things coming down the pike from Infor that will um, kind of enhance that process. But it's still doable, and I still think it's just as good as it's still better than an email, which is what a lot of
Yeah.
organizations use today. So
Yeah.
it's still more beneficial than that. But I did want to
Yeah.
mention that.
Well, and getting people out of this manual process, right? Email, running down the hall, whatever we're doing. Again, we don't have the time for that. We've got to be able to handle things and then move on to the next thing. And I think it's so important to get these items in the hands of the caregivers so that they have not only an item but their preferred item, and in the same time keeping the administrative side of it clean, all the way from that new item added to the catalog, added to the item master, and then through to the patient billing. So good stuff, Ben. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you for watching us, and join us some more on roihs.com under thought leadership. Lots of good stuff there for you, and we'll see you again real soon.
Thank you.